Welcome back, boys and girls. It's time for week 2 of OWL Season 6. Last week generally disappointed in terms of competitive matches in the regular season, and my pick'ems didn't go so hot either, so we're hoping for a lot more this week. This time there's going to be 3 days rather than 4, but it's made up for by having double the amount of Eastern matches compared to last week. A lot of teams have burning questions surrounding them right now, and week 2 could be absolutely huge in deciding the direction this season goes for them. There's a lot to discuss and think about this week, so let's get right into my preview and predictions. Starting off in the West, Toronto play the NYXL, and this provides a great opportunity for Defiant to bounce back after a rough opening week where they went 0-2. There's obviously room to improve, and there's no better way to show off your hard work that you're putting on behind the scenes than with an opponent of this caliber. New York are simply in a very different place. Defiant are probably one of the worst matchups for them. They're just polar opposites currently. New York are this weird team with a lot of pieces trying to fit in and build chemistry, and they're just so organized, especially with what we saw from the backline last week. There were tons of miscommunication issues. And compared to Defiant, I mean, they're extremely familiar with each other, communication is nowhere near an issue, and they basically have these fundamentals down to something as natural as breathing. Defiant simply outplay their opponents through their better organization alone. This should be a pretty easy sweep for them to finally get them on the board. Friday Game 2 features the Justice and the Valiant. You know the story with Valiant already. If they're playing any sort of competent opponent, they probably don't stand much of a chance until proven otherwise. A team like Washington simply has better access to resources and more experienced talent. And if we're being honest with ourselves, we all know the Valiant have no answer for alexyOWL whatsoever, so it's probably an easy 3-0 for Washington. The Valiant can put up a fight, that's pretty evident by what we saw last week, but that's about all they can do against an opponent that is clearly in a different tier. Rounding out a rather lackluster Friday in the West is Titans versus Reign. Sorry token farmers, but Friday is not looking promising. As cool of an underdog as Titans could be this year, the Reign are punching way above their weight class. I do appreciate the Vancouver efforts against Florida and all, but this likely will not be the same result. Atlanta very well could be the best team in the league. And it just so happens that the Reign's specialty is dive, with Lippenstalker terrorizing even the toughest of foes, and that's pretty unfortunate for Vancouver because that is one of their favorite comps to run. They like to go fast, and they're playing straight into the Reign's hands essentially. So I'd say the Reign probably take it 3-0. I don't really think this game will be all that interesting, and the Reign likely will not even bother matching Vancouver in the way that Florida did last week. Day 2 in the West starts with a somewhat interesting pairing of NYXL and LA Valiant. If there was ever a time for the Valiant to have a shot at winning in the spring qualifiers, it's probably this one. New York obviously have the better talent, but their synergy is currently out of whack, and that could mean the Valiant have a fighting shot. It's unlikely, but very doable against a weaker team like this. If they can capitalize on those mistakes made by New York's backline, this could be a lot more interesting than people think. However, it's pretty hard to go against Fitz and Creative and Kellen against an opponent of this nature. I might regret this, but my confidence in New York is not that high, so I have this going 5 maps in favor of NYXL. But this has to be a matchup they're generally favored in. I do think they will win it because of the higher ceiling of their players, plus that experience and the better coaching should be enough to best a contenders level team that literally got assembled like last month. But do not be surprised if this ends up being close, as it heavily gives off those kinds of vibes with how vulnerable one team is and the scrappiness of the other. Keeping on the topic of potential upsets, we got the Boston Uprising versus the Washington Justice. This is the biggest challenge either team has faced so far, and so much is on the line. The winner of this game will probably benefit greatly from like a narrative standpoint, and I genuinely could see it being really close. Plus, if you haven't been paying attention to the news, Izayaki will be missing time indefinitely with a collapsed lung. Obviously, Twilight is a great fallback option, but you never know how this is going to affect Boston's demeanor, and they technically will not be at full strength. It would not be surprising in the slightest if the Justice make this a series. It's going to require an absolute superhuman effort, but I'd say it's possible, especially with alexyOWL and Flora in their corner. However, my pick will be a 3-1 in favor of Boston for 2 reasons. One, Smurf is more inclined to dominate than Mirror in a tank matchup like this. It just favors Boston, as Smurf is more flexible and experienced and brings more to the table as an elite playmaker on his role. Two is Washington are still a bit unproven. Since forming the team, they haven't actually beaten a super high-tier opponent yet. Mostly scraps are coming up short, and until they show me otherwise, I'm going to continue to assume this will be the case unless the meta heavily favors them, and in this specific scenario, I don't really think it does, hence why Boston comes out on top. Next, you've got the LA Gladiators and the Florida Mayhem, and this will be my Western game of the week. It's a rematch of the Pro-Am Finals, for crying out loud. Gladiators definitely have a chip on their shoulder for coming up short, they want that revenge, and Florida did not face a challenge like them in week 1, so there could be some good resistance and Florida might be pushed hard. In my opinion, I think Glads will come prepared for this one because it feels personal. However, this probably plays out exactly like the last one did, if not even worse for Glads. Aside from Gladiators showing they might be a peg below top tier rosters this year, the Mayhem are well equipped to deal with the Gladiators' antics. The Glads are very dependent on their DPS to succeed. If you slow them down, they're likely going to crumble, and Florida have those factors to make this a reality. RuPaul by himself did a great job against Kevster last time, and I'd argue they can do it even better now that Chorong can play his very oppressive and underrated Brigitte. The Florida support line is going to make the lives of Yaki and Kevster very difficult, allowing for the tank players and the DPS to strike first in those critical fights. So I think I'll be taking the Mayhem in a relatively short series. It could be a fun, chaotic matchup, but Florida feels incredibly strong. They have absolutely everything they need to keep this game from getting too out of hand. Florida Mayhem versus Toronto Defiant. The boys take the stage for a second game in a row, and team-wise, Defiant don't match up the greatest to me. They're certainly flexible enough to throw Florida a lot of looks, and when Hydron's hot, basically anything's possible. The only issue that I see is Defiant's losses to Gladiators and Shock may have unveiled an early season weakness. While they're trying to improve, they might lack the stars to keep pace with the more loaded rosters in the league. Ultraviolet and Hydron are proven difference makers, but they just aren't enough. It just feels to me like nobody else can step up consistently, and against a team like the Mayhem, such a well-rounded team like this, it's going to take a lot more than a couple of your guys popping off. Merrick gives you all you can handle on his own, and then you're throwing in Checkmate, who's on his way to being elite this year, plus a more explosive, versatile tank in someone, and Defiant simply get overwhelmed. Florida feel a lot stronger. There was a lot of 3 Overwatch last week, so a result like this just wouldn't surprise me. Boston Uprising versus Vancouver Titans. On paper, Boston should win this quite handily, but to me, the likelihood of Vancouver getting rolled twice in the same week seems unlikely. Boston are bound to have a rough game at some point, and they might end up taking their foot off the gas after beating what a lot of people think of as the more upset-worthy team in the Justice. Everything maybe goes peachy in that game. They get by, they're feeling good, but then they hit a mental wall because the Titans feel very scrappy, and that resistance could frustrate them. You just can't count out somebody like Sugar Free. Lenny is the kind of guy that makes the team around you a lot better, and these are the kind of games that he has and always will live for. And don't forget that Crimzo to this day still might have some sort of ill will towards Decay, so beating him could serve as extra motivation. The Titans have that confidence that you really like, which is why I think that an upset is quite possible. The only issue is Boston are simply more loaded, and it's unlikely they'll play Vancouver's game for an entire set. They're more likely to make those clutch plays and wake up when it truly matters due to all of those superstars. So I have the Boston Uprising narrowly edging out the Titans in a 5-map series. Lastly out west is the Atlanta Reign versus LA Gladiators. The last matchup between these two was a stunning upset in favor of the boys in purple. Could they pull off something like this again? Well, when your DPS and backline are firing on all cylinders like that, anything's possible. The only issue is Houston last week may have set a precedent that things have changed and that top teams are a lot more prepared for the Glads. Don't get me wrong, I think Kevster is still a problem and it seems like Lastro's starting to get hot, but what you have to remember is the last time these two played, the Reign were not ready for Brig. Now here in the present though, she's meta, which means better preparation on how to play against her and with her for the sake of your DPS. Lip is going to be a lot more enabled, the Brig's going to be repair packing him, he's going to farm those EMPs, and something tells me the Glads won't handle it. The Outlaws executed this strategy well last week, and the Reign are a notably stronger Sombra team, which leads me to believe Atlanta will also 3-0 the Gladiators. And that's your Western segment for the video, so time for the East. And day 1, match 1, features the Hangzhou Spark versus the Dallas Fuel. I mean, what else is there to be said that hasn't already? The Dallas Fuel had an absolutely atrocious opening week in the most typical Dallas/Rush-led team fashion. It is very important for Dallas at the very least to show us some sort of life if they don't end up winning this game. Like, it is so critical for them to bounce back and show us that things aren't over and that they're not suffering from some sort of championship hangover or the meta or support line bothering them too much. They have to show us something. And with the guys they have, I think it's very well possible. But again, Spark are just in a class of their own, seemingly, at least on paper, and I think this meta just greatly favors them. Gushui and a Winston meta, Leave and Shy doing their thing as elite snipers, plus Leave on the Tracer and all that. They have all of the weapons they need to make this work, and to put Fuel in their place. As a Dallas believer this year, I want to say they can come back and look strong and make this a good series, but I don't have the heart to do so after what I saw in the first week, as I have the Spark winning the set 3-1. Friday matchup number 2 in the East will be Seoul Infernal versus Shanghai Dragons, and I don't have much to say about Shanghai currently. They need to show me a bit more before I gain more confidence in them as a squad. They showed some life against the Spark, but were obviously inferior to them, and I just think the experience factor with their tank and main support position will cost them early on in the season especially. And the Seoul Infernal showed that they are probably going to be really strong this season. They kind of threw that game away against the Dynasty. They're probably very upset about it, and they want to take it out on somebody. And the Dragons just so happen to be the nearest punching bag available. Dragons need to earn my trust before I assume they're going to start taking wins against respectable opponents. I have the Seoul Infernal winning this thing 3-0 just because they are favored in a lot of aspects. I unfortunately feel that MN3 and Zest are still a bit above Hisu and Viper as a whole, as this type of meta really favors the crazy mechanics that MN3 and Zest have on the Tracer and Hanzo, and what you have to remember is Fletta's Monkey may not do that well against a veteran like Mag. Next, you got the Dallas Fuel versus the Seoul Infernal. And this is where I'm going to have my narrative in my head play out, where Dallas Fuel slowly but surely improve, but maybe take another L this week and then come back strong from here on out, or at least for the rest of the qualifiers. Something tells me it's going to take at least another week to get back on track, if they ever do. And Seoul Infernal are going to be a tough opponent where they get some good learning experiences in. Where I think Dallas could possibly make this series interesting is by making some adjustments, playing around Hanbin better, and then hoping that their DPS have a slightly better outing. On the other hand though, where I think they could fall short in like a 3-2 series, let's say, is their backline. That's where I think Seoul Infernal will stand strong. There's a possibility they will get nervous and almost choke this game away, but ultimately I think the better stability and trust factor with their backline compared to what I saw from Dallas last week will lead them all the way to a very close victory. A bit too close for comfort for Infernal fans potentially, but I still think they will take this one. Next up, you've got the other Seoul team versus the Guangzhou Charge, and this game could also be an absolute banger, and in fact, I'm expecting it to, as it will be my Eastern game of the week. This feels like a great challenge for both squads to help prove that they are legit. How do Guangzhou do against a potentially less confused team? How do the Dynasty do against a team that might not actually choke away a game that's very easily winnable? My answer is I'm not too sure. Comparatively speaking, it feels like Dynasty in a lot of ways could have the advantage at tank, but then maybe with the backline, you would maybe prefer the Guangzhou Charge and the experience that Farway and Xerneas have together. And the DPS, it kind of feels more like a toss-up to me. I don't know what to expect, I really don't. I think the experience factor of the Guangzhou Charge is what I'm leaning towards, plus the Dynasty maybe getting a little lucky last week, so I have the Charge winning this 3-2. I don't have a ton of confidence when saying this, but I feel like Charge have it in them to pull this off. Piggy has shown that even as a solo tank, he can handle people who are maybe a bit more versatile, so perhaps he hangs in there with Belos, Rhea, and Void. And with the DPS, Jimmy might get the upper hand over the young Prophet as he is a rookie. Jimmy's been doing this for a while, and the same can be said for Farwayne Xerneas versus somebody like Lee Soo-min. Speaking of the Seoul Dynasty, they're actually on yet again at the start of Sunday when they play the Shanghai Dragons, and you can basically plug in what I said for the Shanghai Infernal matchup right into this one. Shanghai may be lacking in the experience department in some places. They feel like a really weird team. You're not expecting them to win a lot of games, and I don't know how Fleta, for example, is going to hold up against the tandem of Void and Belos Rhea. That is a lot that he has to go up against. I especially feel that his former teammate Void will get the best of him in any sort of Sigma duel. And I don't know how Viper necessarily holds up against Prophet either in a Tracer battle. This feels like a situation where he will get outclassed by one of the league's best Tracers. This should be a 3-0 in favor of the Dynasty. I'm praying for a close game. This has been a great rivalry for years, but it feels like that era has definitely come to a close. And last, but certainly not least, ending the week in APAC is the Guangzhou Charge versus the Hangzhou Spark, a game with maybe some upset potential if the Charge really are for real. But of course, going off one game against a team that typically struggles in their opening game may not be the best indicator on where they stand. In the Hangzhou Spark, we all rate very highly, so I don't know if an underdog like the Charge is ready for this type of matchup. They're just so insanely stacked at all the places the Charge have their strengths, and they're arguably better with them, like with Gushue on the Monkey, for example. Shy just being an elite hitscan that can handle somebody like Jimmy. Leave being a guy that can counteract Choice A1. He's done it in the past, and he can definitely do it again, especially on a better team. The Spark just might be a bit more comfortable in those dive scenarios. They'll be a bit stronger with the snipers. It feels like they have that slight advantage in most places, and that kind of builds up to something that's pretty significant, and I'd like to see the Charge maybe prove themselves one or more times before I am ready to believe they could beat somebody like the Spark, who I really do think are clearly the best team in the East as it currently stands. I might end up regretting this, but I think the Spark will send the Charge back to reality with a 3-0. I could be very wrong here, and the Charge might make me eat my words greatly, but that's how I currently feel about the situation, and that's what I'm sticking with. Head over heart. And on that note, that pretty much concludes my thoughts on the Eastern region and my expectations and predictions for week 2. My gut feeling tells me that I do really badly this week, and a bunch of other people might as well. As we readjust our thoughts and our rankings, we're scrambling to figure things out and we're overthinking things. I think it's after this week where things potentially start to calm down and we have a better idea of where teams actually stand. But for now, we'll just enjoy the action ahead of us. If you liked this video and you want to stay up to date with all of my Overwatch League content, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. And be sure to let me know what your predictions are for this week down in the comments below. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.